Tom wiped down the counter of his roadside diner for what he thought would be the last time that evening. The old cloth made squeaky sounds against the worn surface as he moved it in slow circles. His hands were rough from years of work, but they moved with care over the counter he'd cleaned thousands of times before. His little place sat just off Highway 36 in rural Colorado, where the mountains loomed in the distance and the sky seemed bigger somehow. Tom's place, the simple sign outside read, its neon lights casting a warm glow against the gathering darkness. For 15 years, this small building had been his whole world. At 58, the former truck driver had put every penny he'd saved into this place after deciding that life on the road had given him enough stories to last a lifetime. Time to plant roots, he'd told himself back then. Now the diner was known by every regular traveler on this stretch of highway, a place where the coffee was always hot, the pie was always fresh, and Tom always remembered your name. Outside, the snow was coming down harder than anyone had expected. The weatherman on the small TV behind the counter had mentioned light flurries that morning. Tom shook his head as he looked out the window. Those weren't flurries. This was the kind of snow that changed plans and rewrote destinies. Some light flurries, he muttered to himself with a short laugh. The wind pushed the snow sideways now, and it hammered against the windows like someone begging to be let in. The parking lot had disappeared under a blanket of white, and the road was quickly following suit. Tom could barely see the road sign. Across the street, he'd sent Jenny and Rick home hours ago, his only two employees who helped during the dinner rush. Get home before it gets bad, he'd told them, though none of them had known just how bad it would get. Now he was glad he'd made that call. Jenny had 3 kids waiting, and Rick had that long drive up the mountain. They didn't need to be stuck here just because Tom wanted company. The clock on the wall read 8:42 p.m. Usually he'd stay open until 10, but tonight seemed like a good night to lock up early. Who'd be crazy enough to be out in this weather anyway? Tom walked over to the door, keys jingling in his pocket, when a flash of light caught his eye. Through the curtain of white, a pair of headlights appeared, moving slowly, too slowly. They were high off the ground, and Tom immediately recognized them as belonging to a semi-truck. The massive vehicle crawled into his parking lot, its wheels struggling to find traction in the deepening snow. The truck's sides were covered with a layer of white, like it had been fighting the storm for hours. Before Tom could even process this unexpected visitor, another set of headlights appeared behind the first, then another, and another. Tom stood by the window, keys forgotten in his hand as he counted them coming in. One by one, the enormous trucks formed a line in his parking lot, creating a wall against the driving snow. 10 trucks in total, their red and white lights blinking through the storm like distress signals. He flipped the diner's lights on and off a couple times, an old trucker's signal that yes, the place was open, come on in. Then he hurried to the coffee machine and started it up again. Something told him he'd need a lot of coffee tonight. The front door pushed open with a gust of frigid air and snow. A mountain of a man stepped inside, snow covering his thick jacket and hat. His beard was dusted white, and he stamped his boots hard on the welcome mat, sending snow flying. "Evening," the man said, his voice deep and weary. "Hope you don't mind the company. Highway's shut down about 5 miles up. Complete whiteout. Nothing moving." Tom nodded, already reaching for clean mugs. "Coffee's coming right up." More drivers filed in behind the first, men and women of different ages and backgrounds, but all wearing the same exhausted expression. Their faces were red from the cold, eyes squinting from hours of straining to see through the blinding snow. Some carried small bags with them, others just themselves, all looking relieved to find shelter. A woman with gray-streaked hair shook snow from her jacket. "State Patrol just closed it down," she explained, unwrapping a thick scarf from around her neck. "They're saying maybe a full day before they can clear everything. We tried calling ahead to motels, but everything's booked solid for miles." Another driver, tall and thin with a weathered face, added, "We were about to set up in our cabs for the night when we saw your lights. Figured it was worth asking if we could at least warm up a bit before hunkering down." Tom looked at their tired faces. 10 strangers brought together by a storm. He thought about his empty diner, the food in his kitchen that would just go to waste, the large storage room in the back with the good heater, the fold-out cot in his office, the extra blankets he kept for cold nights. He made his decision in that moment, without really having to think about it at all. "Well, folks," Tom said, his voice warming the room more than the heater ever could. "Looks like the storm decided who's having dinner here tonight." He moved behind the counter with new purpose, tying his apron back around his waist. "I've got food, I've got heat, I've got space. Not exactly the Hilton, but nobody's sleeping in their trucks tonight, that's for sure." The drivers exchanged glances, relief washing over their faces. "We don't want to put you out," one of them started to say. Tom waved away the concern. "Put me out? This is the most excitement this place has seen since that tour bus full of retired dentists broke down here last summer." His eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. "Besides, I used to drive the big rigs myself. I know what it's like out there." He poured 10 mugs of coffee, the rich aroma filling the diner. The familiar routine of hosting gave him energy he didn't know he still had at this hour. "Looks like we're having an all-night party at Tom's place, he announced, sliding the mugs across the counter. "Hope you all like your eggs scrambled, because that's about the only way I know how to cook them." For the first time since they'd walked in, smiles broke out across the weary faces. Outside, the storm continued to rage, wrapping the small diner in a blanket of white. But inside, the lights were bright, the coffee was hot, and a night none of them had planned for was just beginning. A night that would change everything. A night of connection. The wind rattled the windows of Tom's place as if trying to remind everyone inside just how lucky they were to be there. Outside, the snow had buried the world in white, but inside, the diner glowed with warmth that went beyond the heat pumping from the old radiators. Tom moved around his kitchen with the ease of a man who knew every inch of it by heart. The refrigerator door squeaked in that familiar way as he pulled out everything he could find. Eggs, bacon, cheese, potatoes, onions, the meatloaf he'd made for tomorrow's lunch special, and the 3 apple pies cooling on the rack. His hands worked quickly, tying together a meal from whatever he had available. "I can help," offered one of the drivers, a woman with kind eyes and a faded trucker cap. "Used to work in a diner before I started driving." "Me too," said another, rolling up his sleeves. "Least we can do." Soon the small kitchen was crowded with helping hands. They moved around each other in a clumsy dance at first, but quickly found their rhythm. Some washed dishes as they were used, others chopped vegetables or stirred pots. Tom showed them where everything was with the pride of someone sharing their home. The smell of frying onions and sizzling bacon filled the air, mixing with coffee, and the lingering scent of pine from the small Christmas tree Tom had put up in the corner, even though it was still weeks away from the holiday. "I like to get in the spirit early," he'd explained with a shrug when one of the drivers had commented on it. When everything was ready, they pushed the diner's tables together into one long line. Plates were passed, steaming and full. Tom brought out his famous meatloaf sliced thick with mashed potatoes that one trucker swore were better than my grandmother's, and I'd never tell her that to her face. The drivers tried to pay, pulling out wallets and cash. Tom shook his head firmly. "Put your money away. You can all settle up when the road's clear. Tonight, we're just folks helping folks." A tall man with a beard streaked with gray tried to insist. "You're saving our hides here. Least we can do is pay for the food." "The company would be worth more than the money anyway," Tom replied. "Been a while since I've had a full house." The quiet admission seemed to settle the matter, and the wallets disappeared back into pockets. As they ate, the warmth of food and shelter worked its magic. Shoulders relaxed, faces softened. The conversation, which had started with worried talks about the storm and delivery schedules, slowly turned more personal. A woman with braided hair pulled back a picture from her wallet. "My twin boys," she said, passing it around. "Just turned 7 last month. First time I've been on the road. For their birthday." Her voice held the complicated mix of pride and regret that parents who worked hard to provide often carried. "They're handsome boys," Tom said, passing the photo along. "Look like they've got your smile." "And their daddy's troublemaking spirit," she laughed. "My mom's watching them while I'm on this run. They probably have her climbing the walls by now." An older driver with hands like baseball gloves shared next. Been driving for 32 years, he said, cutting into his meatloaf. Started when I was 20. Seen every state except Hawaii for obvious reasons. His deep laugh rumbled through the diner. Best job in the world if you don't mind being alone with your thoughts. Or podcasts, added a younger driver. I've listened to every true crime series there is. Tom listened as they talked about families waiting at home, favorite routes across the country, the best and worst truck stops, the strangest things they'd ever hauled. One man had transported a whale skeleton to a museum. Another had carried nothing but wedding dresses from New York to Los Angeles. A driver with a soft voice and an accent from somewhere far away told them about coming to America 15 years ago, barely speaking English, and finding freedom in the endless highways. In my village, I never went more than 10 miles from home, he explained. Now I cross this whole beautiful country every month. Sometimes I still can't believe it. As the night deepened, Tom brought out things he had stored away. Extra blankets, for those who would sleep in the dining area, a stack of board games yellowed with age, decks of cards missing a few hearts but still playable. From his office, he retrieved his most prized possession, an old guitar with a scratch down its side but strings that still sang true. You play? Asked one of the drivers, eyes lighting up. Not as much as I used to, Tom admitted, running his fingers lovingly over the instrument. Anyone here know how? A quiet woman who had said little all evening raised her hand hesitantly. When the guitar was passed to her, she transformed. Her fingers found the strings like old friends, and when she began to sing, her voice filled the diner with a warmth that made even the howling wind seem distant and unimportant. Others joined in songs they all knew, old country classics, rock songs from decades past, even a few holiday tunes inspired by the little tree. Some had voices that would never win contests but sang anyway. Others just hummed along. Tom found himself singing louder than he had in years. Between songs, stories continued to flow. The driver with the twins told how she'd once delivered emergency supplies during a hurricane, driving through flooded streets to reach a hospital. Another recalled helping a family whose car had broken down in Nevada, miles from anywhere in the summer heat. That's the thing people don't always understand about truckers, the older driver said, nodding thoughtfully. We see it all out there on the road, the good, the bad, and everything in between. You learn to look out for folks. Tom understood perfectly. In his years behind the wheel before the diner, he'd stopped countless times for stranded motorists, shared meals with strangers at rest stops, and found friendship in unexpected places. The road taught you that everyone was just trying to get somewhere, and sometimes they needed a little help along the way. As midnight came and went, the guitar was set aside. Some of the drivers began to yawn, the long day finally catching up with them. Tom showed them where they could sleep, some in booths, others on the floor with cushions from storage, one lucky person on the fold-out cot in his office. Blankets were distributed and makeshift pillows arranged. Before turning down the lights, Tom looked around his diner. 24 hours ago, it had been just another day of serving regulars and passing travelers. Now it held something different, something rare and precious. What had started as simple shelter from the storm had transformed into something more meaningful. In a world where people often rushed past each other without really seeing, these strangers had found an unexpected moment of genuine connection. As Tom dimmed the lights, leaving just the soft glow above the counter, he thought that maybe the storm outside had given them all a gift. It had forced them to stop, to really see each other, to share their stories and songs, to remember that even strangers could become, just for a night, something like family. The morning after, the first light of dawn crept through the windows of Tom's place, painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of pink and gold. Inside the diner, the makeshift beds of blankets and cushions held sleeping figures, their soft snores mixing with the gentle hum of the heater. Tom had been up for an hour already, moving quietly through his morning routine, the smell of fresh coffee and bacon gradually filling the air. He looked at the sleeping drivers scattered around his diner and felt something tug at his heart. Strangers, yesterday. Somehow not strangers anymore. He'd slept in his office chair, giving up the cot to an older driver with a bad back. His neck was stiff, but he didn't mind. Some things were worth a little discomfort. One by one, the drivers began to stir, awakened by the smells from the kitchen or the growing brightness. They got up slowly, stretching sleep-stiffened limbs, smoothing down hair and looking a bit surprised at their surroundings, as if the previous night might have been a dream. "Morning," Tom called out softly, lifting his coffee pot. "Hope everyone slept okay." The woman with the twin boys was the first to join him at the counter, gratefully accepting a steaming mug. "Better than in my cab," she said, warming her hands around the cup. "Thank you again for taking us in." Others followed, folding blankets neatly before coming to the counter. The quiet woman who'd played guitar offered to help with breakfast, and soon several drivers were pitching in, cracking eggs and buttering toast. The kitchen filled with the hushed conversations of people who hadn't yet fully woken up, but were comfortable with each other now. Through the front windows, they could see the result of the night's storm. The world had been transformed into a glittering white landscape. The snow had stopped falling, leaving behind drifts several feet high. The trucks sat in the parking lot like sleeping giants under thick white blankets. The sky above was a perfect, clear blue, beautiful but deceptively cheerful given the conditions below. "Highway still closed," announced the bearded driver, looking at his phone. "Plows are working, but they're saying maybe noon before they clear our stretch." No one seemed particularly bothered by the news. They gathered around the tables again, eating breakfast and continuing conversations from the night before. Plans were made to help dig out the trucks. Phone numbers were exchanged. Someone suggested they take a group photo when they finally departed to remember the night. None of them noticed the red-haired woman who had pulled into the small, partially plowed section of the parking lot. She sat in her car for a few minutes, taking photos with a professional-looking camera through her windshield. The diner, with its windows glowing warm against the snow and the line of massive trucks behind it, made for a striking image. When she finally came inside, the bell above the door drawing everyone's attention, she looked a bit embarrassed at suddenly becoming the center of focus. "Sorry to intrude," she said, stamping snow from her boots. "I'm Lisa from the County Times. I got stuck in a motel down the road last night and started driving at first light to get some photos of the aftermath." She held up her camera. "I saw all the trucks in this diner still open. It looked like there might be a story here." Tom offered her coffee, which she accepted gratefully. The drivers, now proud of their shared experience, began telling her about the night before, how they'd all found themselves stranded, how Tom had taken them in without hesitation, how they'd shared meals and music and stories while the storm raged outside. "He wouldn't even let us pay," said the older driver, gesturing towards Tom with obvious respect. "Opened his kitchen, shared everything he had." Tom felt his cheeks grow warm. "Anyone would have done the same," he said, wiping down the counter to have something to do with his hands. "Just common decency." The young reporter's eyes lit up. "But that's just it. It's not that common anymore, is it? People taking in strangers, sharing what they have." She looked around the diner, taking in the scene. "Would you mind if I wrote about this? Maybe took a few photos?" The drivers looked to Tom, deferring to him since it was his place. He shrugged, a bit uncomfortable with the attention but not seeing the harm in it. "If everyone's okay with it, I guess it's fine." Lisa spent the next hour talking with everyone, jotting notes in a small pad and occasionally taking photos. Of the drivers helping each other clean snow off their trucks, of Tom refilling coffee cups, of the group gathered around the tables. She asked thoughtful questions about their lives on the road and what the experience had meant to them. "There's something powerful about finding connection during a crisis," she said. "People tend to forget that we need each other." By mid-morning, the highway department sent word that plows were making progress. The main road would be opening section by section throughout the day. The drivers began preparing to leave, packing up the few belongings they'd brought in from their trucks, helping Tom clean the diner and wash the many dishes they'd used. When Lisa asked if they would mind gathering for a group photo outside before they left, everyone agreed. They stood in front of the diner, their massive trucks forming a backdrop with Tom at the center, their breath fogged in the cold air as they smiled for the camera. "This will go with the article," Lisa explained. "Stranded Together: How a Snowstorm Created Community. If that's okay?" Tom nodded, still not entirely comfortable being the focus of attention but touched by the sentiment. He'd never thought of himself as someone who did anything special. Taking in folks during a storm was just what you did. His parents had raised him that way, and out here in rural areas, looking out for each other wasn't exceptional, it was necessary. By early afternoon, the plows had finally cleared their section of highway. The sun shone brightly on the snow, almost blindingly white. One by one, the trucks were ready to go, engines rumbling to life, warming up after the long, cold night. The drivers gathered around Tom for final goodbyes. Each insisted on paying for their meals despite his protests, and the tips they left were far more than reasonable. Handshakes turned into hugs. Promises were made to stop by whenever their routes brought them near. Phone numbers were double-checked, social media connections confirmed. The older driver gripped Tom's hand firmly. "You've got free meals coming at truck stops all over this country now," he said with a wink. "Word travels fast among us highway folks." The woman with the twins hugged Tom tightly. "My boys are going to hear about you," she said. "They should know there are good people in this world." Tom felt a lump forming in his throat as he waved to each departing truck. He stood in the parking lot long after the last one had pulled onto the highway, their taillights eventually disappearing around the bend. The quiet that settled over the diner felt different now. Not the peaceful solitude he was used to, but somehow emptier. As he turned to go back inside, he noticed Lisa still there, leaning against her car. "That was something special," she said, her breath making clouds in the cold air. "I don't think any of them will forget what you did." Tom shrugged again, embarrassed. "It was just one night." Lisa smiled knowingly as she got into her car. Sometimes one night is all it takes to make a difference. Tom watched her drive away, then looked down at the business card she'd left him. "I'll send you a link when the article goes up," she'd told him. "Should be in a day or two." He tucked the card into his pocket and went inside to his empty diner, not realizing that the connections made during that snowy night were far from over. In fact, they were just beginning. Unexpected Fame 3. Days after the snowstorm, Tom was wiping down tables during the mid-afternoon lull when his ancient flip phone began to ring. He almost didn't answer it. Hardly anyone called that number except his sister in Ohio. The phone continued its tinny ring as he dried his hands on his apron and flipped it open. "Tom's place," he answered. "Is this Tom, the diner owner who sheltered the truck drivers?" a woman's voice asked. "Yes, that's me. This is Kathy Brown from Channel 8 News. We'd love to come out and do a story on what happened during the storm." Lisa's article in the County Times has been shared thousands of times online, and we think our viewers would love to hear your story firsthand. Tom nearly dropped the phone. Thousands of times? There must be some mistake. But there was no mistake. Lisa's article, with its simple title, Stranded Together: How a Snowstorm Created Community, had struck a chord with readers. She'd captured the humanity of that night, the way strangers had come together, shared stories, played music, and found connection during a crisis. Her photos of the snow-covered trucks, the warm glow of the diner, and the group standing together before departing had been particularly powerful. By the end of the week, Tom's old phone wouldn't stop ringing. Local television crews arrived first, setting up cameras in his diner and asking him to describe what had happened. Tom, uncomfortable in the spotlight, kept trying to shift attention away from himself. "It wasn't just me," he insisted. "Those drivers helped cook. They shared their supplies. One of them played my guitar better than I ever could. We all just got through it together." But the reporters kept coming back to the fact that he'd opened his doors, declined payment, and treated strangers like family. In a world where people often looked the other way, that simple act of kindness had become newsworthy. Regional networks picked up the story next. A reporter from Denver made the 2-hour drive to interview Tom. Then a national morning show called, wanting to do a live broadcast from the diner the following week. Tom was baffled by it all. "I don't understand," he told his longtime customer Joe, who came in every day for lunch. "It wasn't anything special. Anyone would have done the same." Joe chuckled as he sipped his coffee. "That's just it, Tom. Not everyone would have. And folks are hungry for good news these days." The diner began to fill with curious visitors who'd read about or seen the story. They came from neighboring towns, some driving an hour or more, just to see the place and meet Tom. Many told him his story had brightened their day or reminded them of the kindness they'd experienced from strangers in their own lives. Tom did his best to keep up with the sudden increase in customers. He wasn't prepared for this kind of attention. By the weekend, he'd run out of his famous apple pie twice and had to call the local grocery for emergency supplies. People stood in line outside, waiting patiently in the cold for a table to open up. Then something unexpected happened. An email arrived from the woman driver with the twin boys. Lisa had connected them after the article went up. The message was simple but made Tom's eyes mist over. "You showed my boys what real kindness looks like. They've been telling everyone about the nice diner man who helped their mom. The other drivers and I have been talking. Check your email more often. Something's coming your way." Tom rarely checked his email. Technology wasn't his strong suit, but he began looking more frequently after that. A week later, he received a message from the older driver with a link to something called GoFundMe. When he clicked it, he nearly fell out of his chair. The 10 truckers had started an online campaign called Renovate Tom's Place. They'd shared it within their extensive networks of fellow drivers and on industry forums. Their goal had been to raise $10,000 to help Tom update his aging kitchen equipment, but the campaign had already reached $145,000 and was still climbing rapidly. The description read, "Tom didn't think twice about helping strangers in need. His diner is more than just a building. It's a reminder of how we should treat each other. Let's show him the same kindness he showed us." Underneath were hundreds of comments from people who'd contributed. "I'm a truck driver too. Places like Tom's are becoming rare. Happy to help. My grandfather owned a small diner." This story brought tears to my eyes. In a world where it's easy to lose faith in humanity, thank you for restoring mine. When the local TV crew returned to get Tom's reaction to the fundraiser, they found him sitting at the counter, reading the comments with tears streaming down his face. "I don't deserve all this," he told them, his voice rough with emotion. It was just one night, but it wasn't just about one night anymore. The story had touched something deeper in people. Along with donations came stories. Truckers from across the nation shared similar experiences of finding kindness at roadside establishments during emergencies. Others wrote about times when strangers had helped them in their moments of need. The family who'd offered their spare bedroom during a blizzard, the mechanic who'd fixed a car for free when they were stranded with children, the farmer who'd pulled their vehicle from a ditch with his tractor. What began as a simple story about a snowstorm had opened a floodgate of similar tales, each one a reminder that kindness still existed in the world. Even Tom's suppliers got involved. The coffee company that had been selling to him for years donated a new commercial coffee machine. A kitchen equipment dealer from Denver offered a deep discount on a new refrigerator and grill. A local carpenter volunteered to build new booths. The morning show broadcast brought even more attention. They interviewed Tom in his diner as he worked, capturing his humble responses and obvious discomfort with fame. When asked what he would do with the money that had been raised, Tom looked genuinely puzzled. "I never expected any of this," he said. "I guess I need to think bigger now." That night, alone in his small apartment above the diner, Tom sat with a yellow legal pad, trying to imagine what thinking bigger might mean. The diner had always been enough for him, a simple place where people could get a decent meal and feel welcome for a while. But now, with resources he'd never dreamed of having, maybe it could be something more. He thought about the truckers who'd stayed with him that night, how they'd talked about the road, its loneliness and freedom. How hard it was to find clean showers, decent food, safe places to rest. How the big truck stops had everything but often lacked the personal touch that made a place feel like somewhere, not just anywhere. As ideas began to take shape on his pad, Tom's ancient computer dinged with a new email. It was from Lisa, the reporter whose article had started it all. "I never expected this to get so big," she wrote. "But I'm not surprised that it did. Your story reminds people of something important they sometimes forget, that we're all just travelers looking for a little warmth along the way. When can I come by to hear about what you're planning to do next?" Tom looked around his small apartment at the worn furniture and the faded photos on the wall, his parents, his years on the road, the diner on its opening day. His life had been simple but good. Now, somehow, it had expanded beyond the walls. He'd built around it. "Your diner is more than just a building," one of the messages had said. As he closed his computer and got ready for bed, Tom finally began to understand what they meant. A legacy reborn. 6 months passed like a dream for Tom. Spring had melted the snowdrifts, summer had come and gone with its tourist traffic, and now, the first hints of fall colored the mountains in the distance. Through it all, Tom's place had been transformed. Not just the building itself, but everything it stood for. The renovation had taken 3 months. Tom had insisted on keeping the diner open as much as possible during that time, setting up a temporary service counter and working around the construction. His regular customers had been patient, sometimes sitting at makeshift tables surrounded by drop cloths and the smell of fresh paint. "It'll be worth it," he'd promised them. "Just wait and see." And it had been worth it. The diner was now twice its original size. The expansion had added a second dining area, with large windows facing the mountains. The kitchen gleamed with new equipment that made cooking for the increased number of customers much easier. But what made Tom most proud were the additions, specifically designed for truck drivers. A separate lounge area offered comfortable recliners where drivers could rest while waiting for roads to clear or mandatory break times to pass. Clean shower facilities stood behind the diner, accessible with a keypad code that changed weekly. Free Wi-Fi and charging stations made it easier for drivers to check in with family or update their routes. A small laundry room with 2 washers and dryers hummed efficiently. Outside, the parking lot had been expanded and properly graded to accommodate more trucks. "I wanted to create what I wished existed when I was driving," Tom explained to a reporter during the grand reopening. "Sometimes all you need is a quiet place to catch your breath before getting back on the road." The walls of the diner told a story now. Photos submitted by truckers from across the country lined one wall, images of sunrises over highways, trucks against spectacular landscapes, and the people who kept America's goods moving day and night. Another wall featured the original article Lisa had written, alongside the photo of Tom with the 10 drivers from that fateful night. But the changes went beyond the physical building. The GoFundMe campaign had eventually raised over $500,000, far more than Tom needed for renovations. After much thought and consultation with the original 10 drivers, he had established the Highway Angels Foundation, a nonprofit organization that provided emergency assistance to stranded travelers and support for small businesses that helped people during crises. All 10 of the original drivers sat on its advisory board, their experiences informing the foundation's work. In its first 6 months, Highway Angels had already distributed grants to 5 other roadside establishments committed to being safe havens: a small motel in Wyoming, a family restaurant in New Mexico, a coffee shop in Montana, a general store in Idaho, and another diner in Utah. "The idea is simple," Tom told people who asked. "When you're on the road and trouble hits, weather, mechanical problems, whatever, knowing there's somewhere safe to go can make all the difference." The foundation also maintained an emergency fund for drivers facing unexpected crises while far from home. When a young trucker had suffered a heart attack 2 states away from his family, Highway Angels had flown his wife and children to be with him. When an older driver's home had been damaged in a tornado while he was on the road, the foundation had helped with temporary housing. On the grand reopening day, hundreds gathered in what was now an expanded parking lot at Tom's place. The weather couldn't have been more different from the night that had started it all. Warm sunshine spilled across the mountains, and a gentle breeze carried the smell of pine and the barbecue that had been set up for the celebration. The ribbon-cutting ceremony featured not only local officials but also representatives from national trucking associations. The 10 original drivers had planned their routes carefully to ensure they could all be present, arriving in a convoy that stretched down the highway, horns blaring in celebration as they pulled in. Their trucks were decorated with banners that read Highway Angels Foundation and Where Strangers Become Family. Tom still looked uncomfortable with all the attention, but there was a new confidence in the way he stood. At 59, he walked a little taller now, his eyes brighter, his purpose clearer. When it came time for him to speak, he stepped up to the microphone that had been set up near the diner's entrance. "I'm not much for speeches," he began, his voice steady despite the crowd. "Those who know me know I'd rather be behind the counter cooking than standing here talking." A ripple of knowing laughter moved through the audience. "What happened here was never about me," he continued. "It was about what happens when we remember that we're all just folks trying to make our way in this world. Sometimes the road is smooth, and sometimes a storm comes out of nowhere." He paused, looking at the 10 drivers who stood to the side, nodding in encouragement. "This place has always been about more than just serving food," he said, his voice growing stronger. "It's about recognizing that we're all just travelers looking for a little warmth along the way. The foundation, the renovations, all of it. It's just about making sure that warmth is there when it's needed most." A cheer went up from the crowd as Tom cut the ribbon stretched across the diner's new entrance. People began to file in, admiring the changes while enjoying the familiarity that still remained. The same counter stools, though reupholstered. The same pie recipe, though now baked in a new oven. The same welcome, though now extended to more people. After the ceremony, as the celebration continued around him, Tom found a quiet moment with his unexpected family of 10 drivers. They gathered at a corner table, away from the crowd, each holding a mug of his famous coffee. "Who would have thought," said the woman with the twin boys, now 7.5 and currently exploring the truck lounge under their grandmother's watchful eye, "a snowstorm would change all our lives." The older driver raised his mug. "To unexpected blessings," he said. They clinked mugs in a toast to the night that had changed everything. Tom looked around at these people who had come into his life by chance but had stayed by choice, the foundation of strangers that had become a different kind of foundation altogether. Later that evening, after most of the crowd had gone and only a few customers remained in the diner, Lisa, the reporter, stopped by Tom's office. She'd been covering the foundation's work from the beginning, watching as a simple story of kindness had grown into something that had touched thousands of lives. "Did you ever imagine it would become this?" she asked, gesturing to the new building, the bide, photos on the walls, the foundation logo now painted on the side of the diner. Tom shook his head, looking out the window at the highway where trucks continued to roll by, each one carrying someone with a story, each one driven by someone who might someday need a safe place to wait out their own storm. "Never in a million years," he admitted. "But that's the thing about kindness, isn't it? You never know how far it might travel." Outside, the sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The neon sign that read Tom's Place flickered on, a beacon for travelers as darkness began to fall. Beneath it, a smaller sign had been added, Highway Angels Rest Stop, All Welcome. What had begun as one man's simple act of kindness had evolved into something far greater, a ripple effect of compassion that continued to spread across highways and communities, reminding everyone who heard the story that sometimes the most profound changes begin with just opening a door during a storm.